Two and a Half Admins, episode 187. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. An engineer bought a prison laptop on eBay. Then 1,200 incarcerated students lost their devices.
Yeah, this is a kind of interesting story. So somebody bought one of these prison laptops off eBay just mostly out of curiosity about what it was, other than, a laptop made with a clear shell and no exposed USB ports.
Which, let's be fair, is enough for a lot of people. Like, whoa, transparent laptop? I can get it cheap on eBay? Gotta have one of those.
So in investigating this laptop, the engineer found that these Justice Tech Solutions SecureBook 5 has software on it to restrict what can be done on the laptop, including there's no networking by default. You have to put it in a dock to be able to reach the network. And the software that can run on it is very locked down. But it turns out there's a default password to get into the admin interface for this lockdown software. And that's something he was able to find on the internet. And so with that, it means that they could then install other software on this laptop, which is fine. But they wrote this up and put it on the internet. And that led the Washington State Prisons Department to decide to collect all 1,200 of the laptops that their inmates were using and be like, all right, you can't have them back until we fix the software. But a bunch of people were doing college courses and having their laptop taken away just before their exam period caused them a lot of problems, especially not knowing when I get my laptop back, is it going to have been re-imaged and not have my files on it anymore? What happened to all my work? I never got a chance to save it or anything, because it's not like they can sync to the cloud because they don't have access to the internet with these laptops. That's part of the point.
Now, before we go any further, I do want to point out, in light of a recent story we covered, Tim Burke, his exfiltration of some video footage that Fox would have preferred not to see the light of day, we came down on the side of Fox News and the CFAA as much as it hurt us to do so, because Burke reused a password that was not intended for him, that he did find on the internet, but was tied to a very specific entity who he was not and knew perfectly well that he was not. This is not quite the same situation, because in this case, we're not talking about an account that belonged to a set of credentials that belong to a specific entity. We're talking about a default password that is published on the internet literally for anyone who finds themselves in possession of one of those devices to use. It's not tied to a specific entity, so you're not the wrong entity to use the password should you find it and get into one of those devices where that password has not been changed.
It is worth mentioning here that this engineer managed to get Ubuntu Mate running on this laptop, but only because he really hacked it. This thing doesn't even have USB ports. It's not like with this password, the inmates could just get a flash drive and boot up Linux on it. It takes cracking this thing open and soldering and really working on it. So it was a massive overreaction by the sounds of things.
Right, because to be clear, in case anybody missed it, a large part of this story is the fact that after this guy got hold of this laptop and figured out how to get into it and, make it approximate a working computer for himself, the Department of Corrections then yanked the laptops from something like 1,500 prisoners who were using them to get ongoing education while incarcerated, out of some concern that, oh no, somebody figured out how to break into our super secure laptops, so we can't let the prisoners have them anymore. The only thing is, in order to break into the laptops the way the engineer did, you need to be a free person with all of the resources a free person can bring to bear to it. You need to be able to freely buy things. There's just a lot going on there. A sane response would have been, look how hard that guy had to work and all the resources he needed to employ in order to gain access to this device. We're going to pat ourselves on the back now because this was an excellent fit for devices locked down to hand to prisoners.
Or even, okay, there's a vulnerability in our secure laptop. We'll start updating them and swap them out one at a time. Not just, we're going to yank these away from everybody, screw over their college semester, and maybe we'll give them back later and probably not with the files on them anymore.
The timing was also really terrible on this. Students using these devices were enrolled in a bachelor's program through the University of Puget Sound in collaboration with the Freedom Education Project of Puget Sound. And Tanya Erzin, faculty director and former executive director of FEPS, said, "This is a critical moment because students in our bachelor's program are preparing to graduate and finish research and writing for their capstone projects. It's already a struggle for them to conduct research without access to the internet or databases, and this will only exacerbate the situation." Which, Yeah, doing research without the internet or databases is hard. Doing it with no computer at all? Obviously, it can be done. I mean, the world didn't spring into existence sometime in the 1970s, but by modern standards, to a standard of both quantity and quality sufficient to get you a bachelor's degree, that's a big ask.
Yeah, and they have other examples here. Students in community college programming and web design programs were told that the web development courses were just canceled until further notice because if none of the students have laptops, then there's no point in having class.
Call me a bleeding heart liberal if you want, but isn't this exactly the kind of thing that inmates should be doing? Educating themselves, preparing for when they're released so that they don't end up back in prison, like learning digital skills, web development, for example, and denying them this over basically just a scare story that, oh, they might be hacked. It just seems to just be kicking them when they're down.
Well, this may surprise some folks, but I actually come from a bit of a cop family. My stepdad was a parole officer. His nephew, who actually lived with us for quite some time, was a police officer. And they used to talk all the time, particularly Butch, again, parole officer, so he dealt with folks who got out of prison. I don't think a week went by that I didn't hear him talk about prison as con college 2 or 3 times, because the old cop joke, or whatever you want to call it, is that, somebody goes to prison and they learn how to be a better criminal. They pick up new skills from all the other inmates. Well, here you had a bunch of cons going to actual con college, and you took it away from them. So what are they going to do with their free time? Well, in some cases, yeah, they're going to go to con college.
Yeah, and it's just in general, it kind of harkens back to our discussion last week about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Is this kind of overreaction by people that don't actually understand what's going on is how we get into trouble in the first place oftentimes. And it's one of the biggest problems with the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is they have a policy that's so far-reaching that they can just apply it to any situation. In this case, they don't understand what this engineer managed to do with the laptop he bought on eBay, so nobody can have a laptop until we hire some people to come in and tell us it'll be okay to give people laptops again.
Now, I know it's a bit flippant given this is quite a serious story, but like you mentioned at the start, Jim, I'm looking at this and I really want to add it to my pile of laptops. It looks so cool.
Right? I do not have any problem whatsoever imagining somebody trawling eBay looking for weird crap to buy and finding a laptop that you could see all the bits and pieces inside and being like, yes, one of these, please.
I also just looking at wonder, is that ruggedized touchpad actually better?
It looks 3D printed to me.
There's also, honestly, there is a certain cachet, even above and beyond the whole transparent thing, to literally just being able to, like I'm using a prison laptop. Like it's just, it's kind of fun in an immature teenage way. But let's be honest here. All of us have at least been immature teenagers. And well, I know the two of you and I know myself. So I might be 52, but I'm still an immature teenager.
Devs left with tough choices as Warner Brothers ends all Adult Swim games downloads.
We have seen this phenomenon in many other things in many other places recently. You see streaming companies decide we're going to remove all these movies and television shows, and you're like, what? Why? Like, I would like to watch that, and I'm paying you money every month, and it's not like it costs you anything extra really to have that there, right? And it's actually kind of hard to say whether it does or it doesn't when it comes to most streaming services, because you don't know the terms of their licensing arrangements with the original content creator. Sometimes it's per view, in which case, yeah, it's dumb to ever give up that license because it doesn't cost you anything until somebody views it. So why would you not want it to be available? But a lot of the times, there may be a monthly minimum and it might be quite large. And once enough people aren't viewing it, it really does represent an actual financial drain. And it totally makes sense to get rid of that license and take that content off of the service. Now, so far, we're talking about video stuff mostly, things you might watch on a streaming channel. What's happened here is something similar, but now we're looking at Warner Brothers, which bought Adult Swim Games a few years ago, pulling them all off of Steam. And this is not really a case, as far as I can tell, of any kind of real money-saving anything. It's just literally that Warner Brothers just doesn't want to bother managing that content anymore. And if all Warner Brothers was doing was saying, hey, we don't want to be responsible for this stuff anymore. Creators, would you like to have the license to your games back? then this would be like a feel-good story or not a story at all. But that's not what Warner Brothers did. In fact, once the news got out that, these games are getting delisted from Steam, some of them with still quite enthusiastic, if at this point smaller, user groups, some of the creators reached out and were like, hey, can you just transfer that to us? Matter of fact, here's instructions on the literally 3 clicks that you need to make with your mouse in order to transfer the Steam ownership of this game as it currently exists from you to me without messing with anything else. And Warner Brothers' response boiled down to pack sand. Just cannot be bothered. Like, if you want to re-upload it yourself, whatever, but that might sound, again, like it's a good enough solution, but it's kind of not, because when you re-upload a game to Steam, you've broken all of the original stuff. The achievements are gone. The community is gone. All the mods have to get dealt with again. There's a lot of stuff that goes in to a once popular Steam listing that has had a lot of history with it. It comes to my mind then to think, it might make sense understanding, how deep a Steam listing can go in terms of complex, nested relational data. It would make more sense for Valve to be like, hey, we'd like to not be responsible for this anymore. But Valve is fine with maintaining like a database and forums and, everything else related to the ability to access this game on Steam. But Warner Brothers, who has to do essentially nothing at this point other than rake in less money than they'd like to, is like, nah.
That's what I don't understand about this, right? This is essentially passive income for the company. Why would they want to make an effort to end passive income, even if it's only a few $100s?
Maybe because they're planning to then sell the licenses to make games based on those properties to somebody else to get new money. That's back to Jim's example with streaming services. Sometimes, we sign an agreement that we'll license this content you for 3 years. And at the end of that, we're going to shop for somebody who would like to have this content and didn't and is willing to pay more, or we're going to move it to our own service. We saw Paramount pull Star Trek from a bunch of stuff, and it's like, actually, it's available nowhere for now, but we're going to have our own service soon, and then once it's up, you can watch it there. Oh, but it's not going to be in your country. Sorry.
That's unlikely in this case, though, because Warner Brothers has told the creators that they're allowed to re-upload the games as like a new Steam entry. Once the old Steam entry is gone, then the creators can upload it all over again. The problem is that, it's like a whole new thing then. What this looks like to me is literally just Warner Brothers wanting to conserve focus. They're like, this is not what we want to focus on right now, so we don't want to have to think about it anymore. And we're done thinking about it, matter of fact. So like all this shit with you telling us about 3 clicks that we can do and, make this your problem again and not ours, that's already thinking about it more, and it's not what we want to do.
We've already laid all those people off. There's no one left to click the link. Maybe Valve can step in and be the heroes here and transfer the entries to avoid the problem of, we re-upload this and it's a different ID.
They'd have to get Warner Brothers permission first, and Warner Brothers hasn't given their permission.
I suppose, yeah. It's like, we've washed our hand of it already. Sorry, bye.
Yeah, I don't think Valve can make it much easier than 3 clicks without violating, the terms themselves.
Mm-hmm. This kind of stuff happens a lot, especially with what we call licensed content, whether it's, for a video game or whatever. Like, I know another development company who had the rights to make a Marvel massively multiplayer online game, like MMORPG with all the Marvel characters. And they got quite a way through developing it. And then Marvel decided, actually, we're withdrawing the license. You can't have the license. We're going to give it to someone else, or we decided we just don't like your game, or whatever it happened to be. So they had to release the game under a different name. And it was just like generic superhero game. And it was not successful because it didn't have the draw of all the Marvel characters people know. The other one you see is a lot with is like sports games and racing games. Like, we'll sell the license to use these tracks or this organization's racing series in your game, but we're selling it to you for like 2 years. And 2 years from now, we're going to sell the rights for the game to someone else, and you're going to have to just stop using your game and also screw everybody who bought your game. Because, you're not going to be able to have the rights to have Ferrari cars in your game anymore.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to 2.5admins.com/support for details of how you can support us too. 2.5 Admins is part of the Late Night Linux family, which means that for $10 a month on Patreon, you get access to an RSS feed that contains all the Late Night Linux family shows without adverts like this. There's also an option to get just this show ad-free for $5 a month if you prefer. Some of the episodes are even released a day or so early for Patreon supporters. So, if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us at 2.5admins.com/support. Google's self-designed office swallows Wi-Fi like the Bermuda Triangle. This is so funny. They spent a just ridiculous amount of money designing their fancy office campus.
Which essentially looks like a circus tent made out of concrete.
Like on purpose.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was on purpose that it looks like a circus tent, but they definitely made it really, really weird on purpose, and that was the effect.
It actually looking like a tent was on purpose.
Oh, okay.
Part of it is so that between the panes of that, they have glass so they get lots of natural light and so on. But yeah, it's supposed to look like it's made of material, but it's actually made out of concrete. And so it's supposed to have that saggy look and look like a tent, not necessarily a circus tent.
I thought the weird saggy cells on the roof that end up looking like a tent, what I was seeing was that the purpose for that was to enhance rainwater collection to minimize the freshwater consumption for the facility.
A little bit of that too, but part of it was the bits it creates between the sags that you can kind of see there, that is to get more natural light inside as well.
Well, either way, the Wi-Fi reception in there is so bad that people are either tethering their phones or going outside because the Wi-Fi is better outside than inside. And you can only assume it is something to do with the physical design of the space.
It's an enormous open space, which is already part of the problem. There aren't enough stories for how large the vertical building is. It is 2-story, but both stories are on the bottom and relatively open. And then you just got an incredible amount of open air leading up to this weird roof that's like a whole bunch of essentially quasi-parabolic cells. So you're going to get really, really weird reflection and propagation patterns off of that. They're going to be quite strong. First, you have to understand, when you're doing a campus, enterprise-level wireless access point deployment design, when you're designing the network, where you put the APs, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that you conserve airtime as much as possible by staggering the frequencies, the channels that each access point uses, so that one access point will be sitting inside a small, basically a hex grid, circle of other access points, and the one in the center won't be sharing a frequency with any of the ones that surrounds it immediately. 2 access points away, that's when you begin, reusing those frequencies again, and you try to tune your transmission strength down low enough so that a cell won't actually reach 2 cells away strongly enough to interfere and force devices over there to shut up while it's talking. So this all sounds great, but it works better when you have at least a little bit of something in the way of walls or other RF absorbent barriers.
Even drywall.
Yes, exactly. I mean, just a simple drywall barrier is good for 3 decibels. That's, it's a significant decrease. And without anything, then you end up with RF that already travels much, much further because there's nothing getting in the way. And even worse, when you've got this weird, crazy roof, I think that is contributing, because I don't find it hard at all to imagine RF either hitting the roof directly from the APs, which are much, much lower, they're closer down to where all the people are, or RF bouncing off of the floor and then up to the roof. It hits these cells, which are, again, it's a collection of like the backside of parabolic arcs, scattering all of it. So you're going to get a really strong radiation reflection pattern from one cell into a cell that is further over than its immediate neighbor. Now, if you've got every AP hitting 3 or 4 other APs that are on the same channel as it is, you have now massively multiplied the number of devices on each collision domain to the point where everybody's got great signal and nobody's got any damn airtime to use it with.
Yeah, or just the fact that kind of like they talk about in like ham radio is like when the weather's just right and the signal will bounce and you can hear Australia from the west coast of the US. In this case, based on where a certain access point is, it reaches much further away than the one beside it, even. And it just really would make the site survey for plotting out those non-overlapping channel sets really difficult. And I'm also guessing that they did the site survey and installed these before some of the other furniture was in there, and it kind of subtly changes everything. But I think the giant openness of the space is one of the biggest things, like Jim was saying, without something to stop the propagation from going a lot further than it normally would in a building that's split up more, then you just get, like you said, no airtime at all because everybody's shouting in one big loud room. It reminds me of like when you go to a big party or a conference like that and there's so many people talking, it feels like there's actual like sound pressure in the room. And when you step outside and it goes away, you just feel that much better. And then it's like your Wi-Fi has that same feeling when it's in a busy place and then goes outside where it's relatively quiet.
When we talk about the open plan and the challenges that it faces for Wi-Fi, I can give you direct lived experience of my own. I have set up more than one warehouse with a very large warehouse with Wi-Fi access points designed to allow somebody to walk through the entire enormous warehouse space with a handheld scanner backed by Wi-Fi and scan barcodes off of boxes. And what you discover very quickly is that you can set that up and it will work great as long as the warehouse is a certain degree of full, because the warehouse is going to have very, very tall vertical aisles with shelves on either side. And when you've got a certain amount of fullness in those shelves on either side, they function as walls and RF barriers the same way that drywall does in the office space. But if the warehouse ever gets cleared almost all the way out, you start discovering problems getting your scanners connected. Again, because it's not so much connected. It's not that they say they can't connect to the Wi-Fi. It's like, I keep wanting this. Why won't the thing go beep? And again, it's because no airtime, because now instead of, only your AP being able to hear devices, on this aisle and maybe the next aisle over, now all of a sudden every AP can hear every single device and every single device can hear every single device and like nothing has any time to talk. And about the only way to deal with it when that happens, I mean, the good side of it is your warehouse is almost empty, so you probably don't need a full crew anymore. So you get one guy in there with a wand, and he doesn't have any problems because he doesn't really have anything to compete with.
When you were talking about the warehouse example at the beginning, I was like, I wonder how just the relative density of what's on the shelves makes it different. Like, oh, we got in a shipment of these really blocky things, so now the signal's worse in this aisle. Or we got these really transparent things, and so now there's too much backscatter and so on.
Yeah, blocky definitely makes it better because it increases the isolation aisle to aisle, but it has no impact on, you're really getting direct propagation all the way from the ceiling, which is going to be quite high, straight down through the aisle. So it's good when you have extra RF blocking stuff in between. Mm-hmm. I've never really seen any problems with anything not being RF absorbent enough because, I mean, if it's in shipping containers, even just cardboard, like that's enough. Mm-hmm. A heavy duty cardboard box that's sufficient to like give to UPS to ship something, you've already got a pretty similar amount of RF absorption to if you had a drywall wall there. And
so, yeah, the solution for Google is probably put up some cubicle dividers.
The solution is to actually treat your employees like freaking humans instead of cattle that you just shove into a giant empty space as cheaply as possible with as few sight obstructions as possible so that you can keep your eye on as many of them as possible, which, let's be honest, I don't care what somebody tried to sell you about, all the collaboration and the communication and the harmony. That's what these giant open floor plan office spaces are really about.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an RSS feed with no ads that includes either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And you even get some episodes early. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Peter writes, how do you manage golden images? I know there was a tool for Red Hat and CentOS systems, Vert Sysprep, that worked like the Microsoft Sysprep tool that allowed you to convert a system into a golden image by stripping out the machine ID, host name, network settings, SSH host keys, and so on, but I've not found a Sysprep tool for Ubuntu. I'm in the process of converting a couple dozen or more bare metal servers to VMs running on a Proxmox cluster, and the process I was hoping to use was to build a VM, then convert it to a template, and then clone that template to deploy a new server. A consultant tells me that for various reasons this is not the way to do it and advises that I create some sort of build script with my choice of automation tool. I realize that at scale automation tools are a must, but I am kind of in that middle ground where I have not embarked on that journey as of yet. I do have the need to deploy a dozen or so identical VMs. What do you recommend? If Sysprep is out of favor, what sort of automation tool should I be looking at?
So this actually came up for me very recently. I don't usually use any particular Sysprep tool. I do a lot of cloning from golden images, but usually I'm only deploying one VM per LAN at a time kind of a deal. And the only issue that I've actually encountered with not, doing some kind of a system preparation to make sure that two images aren't too identical is when the machine ID is identical, you won't be able to shell into that machine from another machine with the same machine ID. Now, everything else the two machines can do fine on the network. If you wanted them to talk via NFS or Samba, I've never seen any issues with that. But like you'll discover that if two VMs have the same machine ID, you won't know why, and the errors will be really weird. But when you SSH into the other one from the one with the same machine ID, it just won't work. And there is not, so far as I can tell, any kind of a tool to deal with that. However, you can just RM etc. machine ID and restart the system, and it will generate a new machine ID and go from there. Now, you do still have the issue potentially of your SSH host keys, but that's not really something that's going to prevent anything from working. The issue there is if you've got multiple machines with the same host keys, you can't tell which one is which when they shell into other systems. It won't keep them from shelling into other systems. But if you've got 5 machines and they all have the same host key, well, then you can't tell which one shelled into which one very reliably when you're looking through the logs later.
Well, and also when you shell into them in the first place, the host key that you get, is this the machine you think it is? If you get a whole bunch of them all have the same one, it can be a problem. It can especially be a problem if you share your image to other people, then everybody's machine has the same host key ID. And that means that somebody else using that image could man in the middle, and you wouldn't know that you weren't connecting to your machine, but to their machine because it has the same host ID.
Right. So the best way to deal with that, in my personal opinion, is just apt purge SSH and apt install SSH. When you apt purge it, it'll get rid of the etc. SSH, which includes all of the host keys. And when you reinstall it, it will regenerate them all. And so, yeah, I personally think that's the easiest way to do it is just when you deploy a gold image, ideally, maybe don't even have installed SSH on it at all yet. Leave that as, what you're doing with the deployment. And then in that case, the only thing you need to do is just make sure that you remove the machine ID.
And I think that's exactly what the consultant is kind of talking about here. There's kind of two cases. Part of the idea with this sysprep, and even partly it sounds like what you're doing the physical to virtual migration, is if you're taking an existing machine and trying to turn it into a VM, that's generally not going to be a golden image, right? You're going to try to keep the identity of that machine and just convert it into a VM. But if you're trying to create a golden image that you're going to clone like 20 times, generally you want that to start as a fresh install and not have a bunch of detritus in it that you have to clean up or are going to end up replicating across all of these clones of it.
Yes, absolutely. I had missed that part that we were starting from bare metal here. Yeah, those are not golden images. If you're starting from a bare metal machine, that's a pewter image at best.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you have a physical machine and you want to turn it into 4 VMs and you want them to be separate, then part of this process might make sense there. But in general, I think especially what your consultant is trying to tell you is when I do this, I use on FreeBSD, there's a tool called Poudre, which is used for building packages, but it's also a tool for building VM images. And I like to use it because I can take a fresh install of FreeBSD from the build or a download from FTP or whatever, and basically build it out in a directory, choose which parts I want to remove and add, and then overlay my configs and everything so that I'm making an image from a recipe, basically, and then the output is this image. And when I want to go back and change something about it, instead of having to take the existing golden image or an existing running machine and remove bits from it and patch it, basically, I have this recipe where I'm going to start from scratch and I'm going to build everything and only what I want in each image. And it makes it much easier.
And I do something fairly similar, but from a slightly different direction. Whenever I create a golden image, it is literally just the cleanest possible minimal install of that operating system with, like if you need any special drivers for VirtIO or whatever, absolutely install all those, but just the bare minimum nothing. That's your gold image for that OS. Now, then you may have another gold image that you base on that, where you take that original gold image, you install a small set of applications that work together that you're going to need on 5 or 10 VMs, whatever, that you're deploying all the time. And that's kind of a stage 2 gold image. That's the gold image for that kind of app server that you build and deploy all the time. Whereas the first one was the gold image for just plain Ubuntu or, whatever your distro of choice happens to be. Yeah,
and with Poudre, the part of the reason I'm doing that is I can then change the base itself. So if there's a new patch or I'm switching from FreeBSD 13.2 to 13.3, I can use the same recipe, but use a different version of the OS. And then I'm going to plonk down these same, extra settings for SSH or the default users I want built into every image or this list of applications I want installed, and I'm going to install the latest version of those packages, not the version that came when we built the golden image. And so I can regenerate my golden images every week if I want, and they'll always be that little bit newer. So when we're deploying a new version of that VM, it's not 3-month-old packages, it's 1-week-old packages.
About the only time I'll do like the second order, golden image that we were talking about, where you install like a set of applications. That's really something I only do on the Windows side. Because, over on the free software side, I'm like, well, applications, those are all just an apt or a, PKG away. So why would I pre-install that? If you're talking about like an entire graphical desktop interface, sure, if I want that, maybe I'll go ahead and install that in my golden image. But like, any applications, Apache, MySQL, applications built on either of those, whatever, it's just so quick and easy and reliable to install them wherever you happen to be that I'm just more of a, apt install, blah, 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 and done.
Yeah, or the automation software, whether it's Ansible or Puppet or whatever, is going to take care of adding the applications based on the role that's assigned to this machine.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send in your questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.